Hello, my name is Lauren Bell. I'd like to introduce to you the life, work, and influence of David Carson. I will share with you his upbringing, his entrance into graphic design, and the works for which he is most famous. David Carson is arguably the most famous graphic designer in history. His unconventional yet experimental graphic style of grunge typography revolutionized the world of graphic design in America during the 1990s. He is most famous for being the artist behind the magazine Ray Gun, in which he introduced the innovative typographies and distinct layouts for which he is most known. He is claimed to be the godfather of grunge typography, which he employed in these magazine issues. On September 8th of 1954, David was born in Corpus Christi, Texas. He attended San Diego State University, where he studied and obtained a Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology. He was also a high school teacher before beginning his career in graphic design. He first dipped his toes in the pool of design by attending a 2-week design course at the University of Arizona in 1980. This would ultimately lead to Carson studying at the Oregon College of Commercial Art as a way of immersing himself completely within the design realm. Carson came to the world of graphic design relatively late in life, and before showing his abilities, he had made his name as the 9th best surfer in the world in 1989. Carson began showing his work as a designer for a magazine entitled Self and Musician. Carson was perfect for this job, as this magazine covered the interests of surfers, something that he was extremely familiar with. He later went on to work for other magazines such as Transworld Skateboarding, and this was Carson's first experience with experimental design. Eventually, he was promoted to art director for the magazine in 1984. It was in this role that Carson worked tirelessly to expand its style and layout. Many have speculated that it was through this role with Transworld Skateboarding that Carson developed his most famous style of dirty or grunge photography. Carson also briefly worked for the magazine Beach Culture as their art director. After only 6 short issues, the magazine closed. The opportunity, however, opened the door to his recognition, and he went on to receive hundreds of design awards. I would speculate that his run with Beach Culture also led to his job with Ray Gun in 1992. The magazine Ray Gun focused on alternative music. Marvin Scott Jarrett took note of Carson's potential within the graphic design realm, and Carson proved this to be true as he tripled the magazine's circulation and attracted a newfound audience that was extremely diverse. Distinct characteristics of Carson's design style are busy typography, varieties of patterns, and overlapping objects and pictures. Carson is most famously known for his quote, "Don't mistake legibility for communication." In an interview, Carson explained that oftentimes traditional forms of communication result in misunderstanding. So what appears to be chaos is often intentional placement. Every stroke, idea, and letter possess a different attribute that Carson uses to evoke emotion. Although Carson was respected by many, he also faced criticism for what many referred to as incomplete, misleading, or even broken design. Carson began to attract a young readership that Ray Gun had never experienced. Through his bold and sometimes controversial pieces, he established his own design brand. He would later go on to open David Carson Design, which produced for Pepsi, Levi Strauss, Nike, MTV, and many others. Carson paid homage to his journey by producing 3 design books that incorporated his own personal story. The first book, entitled End of Print, was also a film created alongside William Burroughs. The second book, entitled Second Sight, focused on intuition. Carson believes this is something that can't be taught, thus making it the most important portion of design. Carson jokingly said in an interview that he cannot teach the 4 steps of intuitive design, but he can teach the 4 steps to making a nice business card or newsletter. The most famous piece that came from the second book was this print. In an interview, Carson said, "I like this for a couple of reasons. If you've had any design courses, they would teach you that you can't read this. I think you eventually can, and more importantly, I think it's true. Don't mistake legibility for communication. Just because something's legible doesn't mean it communicates, and more importantly, it doesn't mean it communicates the right thing." This piece employs the grunge typography style that Carson was most famous for. The sharp contrast of black on white emphasizes the importance of the words. The legibility of the words requires you to focus on the type, which in turn results in deeper interpretation. The design also exhibits a quality of balance. The text is evenly distributed from the top half, of the page to the bottom. The staggering of letters and the artistic wave that Carson added to the typeface control the movement of the viewer's eye into almost a rhythmic pattern. Through this use of rhythm, Carson creates an almost animated aesthetic. In this piece, Carson seems to concentrate on a hedonistic perspective he designed simply to attract attention to his personal statement. One piece of Carson's work that was not widely known, yet extremely interesting, is his work in honor of Marshall McLuhan. Carson diligently worked alongside McLuhan's wife and son to develop a book of quotes. The original book was filled with over 600 quotes, and it was over 500 pages. He included quotes that proved McLuhan to be ahead of the times and influential within the world of media. Carson would then interpret the quotes by creating art pieces to illustrate them. Of all of the pieces, this was my favorite. It was illustrated to match McLuhan's quote of, "New media are not bridges to nature, they are nature." This piece was intended to touch on the issues of intellectual property and the way that printing had destroyed the concept of anonymity. Carson had also immersed himself within corporate design. One of my favorite pieces of Carson's is his string of Pepsi advertisements created in 1996. In this piece, Carson fills a traditional Pepsi can with text. The piece is so influential because the text within describes the demographic of the people who love Pepsi. He took a unified object and divided into words that reunified the subject. This use of unity within his design ultimately created a captivating and eye-catching piece. His sharp use of contrast within the white background draws the viewer's eye to the words. He achieves asymmetrical balance in his inclusion of text in the top corner, which balances out the weight of the bottle in the bottom. Similar to pieces from the Dada era, this piece was unique and well respected by viewers around the world. Although it is rare, I believe in this piece that Carson achieved the golden mean. He juggled the responsibility of creating a piece that drew in the viewer's eye. It was unique to look at, and yet he still served the purpose of advertising for Pepsi. I chose to riff off of this design. From an aesthetic viewpoint, it might be difficult to see the correlation. However, I used the same concept of dividing a unified object into many pieces. I followed Carson's use of grunge style by including a variety of text in varying sizes and fonts. The words within the shape illustrate some of the controversial topics in our country. The outlying words that make up the border of the country are in hopes of symbolically reunifying, just as Carson chose to unify Pepsi with demographics. In many of his pieces, Carson used color combinations that were bright and vibrant. I chose to do this as well. I chose words such as love, compassion, kindness, and forgiveness as bordering words of the piece. I did so because I believe they are one of the solutions to the tragedies we are facing. Secondly, there are many words that make up this piece, and some are not legible. For example, words such as laws, bipartisan, and Congress. However, based on Carson's principles, legibility does not always equal communication. The fact that I'm trying to communicate is essentially that we live in a broken country with many different ideologies. However, there are universal themes that tie us together. If we focus on these, we have the ability to reunify ourselves again. In conclusion, David Carson was an influential graphic designer who emerged in the late 1980s and took off in the 1990s. His work with magazines such as Self and Musician, Ray Gun, and Beach Culture ultimately shaped the world that we know today.